everyone. I'm Dr. Kavita, and you're listening to the Unlearning podcast. This is a podcast that I've created because I'm a shrink on a mission to help others to figure out what we may need to unlearn and how we got there. We're going to explore a variety of mental health topics from the scientific to the philosophical and use these different lenses to see and identify different thinking and emotional patterns and behaviors that we may be engaging in that may not be helping us. So let's go do some unlearning. So today I want to talk about cognitive distortions, which I've kind of touched on a little bit previously on a reel on my platform. And another way to think about them are thinking traps. Who first thought of it? So it actually came about in the 1960s when psychiatrist Dr. Aaron Beck, who's now known for creating CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, it's one of the biggest, most widespread therapy modalities used. He was studying depression at the time in his patients, and he had noticed that they were saying the same negative thoughts over and over again. And it looked like not random, but like these actual repetitive thinking patterns. And this was the time when Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic psychotherapy and way of practice was most prominent at the time. Think of the patient sitting or laying down on the couch and looking up as the therapist is somewhere else in the room and talking. That's what was more prevalent at that time and in practice. But then Dr. Aaron Beck was like, this is something else I'm seeing that's going on with the way people are thinking. So he would notice patients saying things like, I'm a failure, nothing's ever going to go right, or nothing will ever go my way, or people don't like me. Things that really sound familiar that maybe some people, I hear all the time that say to themselves today. So he was noticing that and the predictable patterns that were there. So with all of that, he realized something profound, that with depression or even anxiety, it wasn't just the emotions, it was how people were interpreting reality and their perception of reality. And it started with these thoughts or thinking patterns. And that later led to him creating what we now know as cognitive behavioral therapy, where essentially what that modality is about is thoughts then lead to certain emotions, which then drive our behaviors. And if you can imagine a triangle, they all affect each other. What I want to go over today, there are many different kinds of cognitive distortions, but I want to go over the 10 big ones that I see a lot and I think happen for all of us and even for myself. So number one, all or nothing thinking. So this can also be thought of as black and white thinking, where we either see things as all good or all bad or successful or failure. Like it's black and white, as if there's no gray. And obviously, there are grays in life and things are not just cut and dry like that. So some examples of that could be I lost my patience with my kids today. I'm such a bad parent, which obviously isn't true. But then, if we're stuck in that kind of way of thinking or that thinking trap of, it's all or nothing, then we could be making conclusions like that about ourselves that are not even true. So all or nothing thinking. Number two, overgeneralizing. So if something happens, we then make that generalized statement, blanket statement about our life. Like, ooh, that conversation with that person really didn't go well. I must be so awful. Like, I'm like socially so awkward. And it's like, whoa, hold on. When one thing happens, that doesn't mean that it's always going to be like that all of the time. But that could be another thinking trap that we could fall into when we overgeneralize from one event or one thing that happens. Number three, catastrophizing. So this is an anxious-driven type of cognitive distortion or thinking trap where we think the worst case scenario is going to happen. So it's like, if you're working on a project or a presentation and you think that you're automatically going to fail or not get a good grade, it's when your brain is right away going to thinking of worst possible or worst case scenario. Another example could be oh, my boss asked to talk to me. Oh, I'm definitely going to get fired. That's the worst case scenario. and, and well, it's quite a big jump, but a lot of us could do that. I see this all the time, and it's very anxious driven, worry driven. And so that's definitely a big one. I think we, really would want to catch ourselves doing, because when we're catastrophizing, we want to make sure to challenge ourselves and think, wait, is that worst case scenario actually legit? Could that actually happen? What's the probability truly or likelihood of it happening? And it's probably not as big as your brain is making it seem to be. And number 4 for cognitive distortions, mental filtering. So that's when the brain is focusing on only the negative details of things. So this is like the negativity bias segment that I did. It's basically that's what mental filtering is, as far as that thinking trap. So one example of that could be is, you get dressed up really nice, and you go out and you get so many compliments. Like, let's say you get 10 compliments on how you look, and then someone says one thing, and it's like one little kind of criticism, maybe a backhanded comment, and then that's all your brain fixates on. And all those other really nice compliments, they go out the window. And even though there are way more of those positive comments to you, there's that one negative one that is what gets stuck. And that's something I think all of us do too, that we want to be really careful about: mental filtering. You don't want to filter out all the really good, positive things that people say to us or that happen to us, and focus on the negative. But that's what could happen with this one. It's that negativity bias. Okay, number 5 is discounting the positives. With these cognitive distortions, by the way, there could be, more than one obviously happening at a time. So I feel like this one can go hand in hand with a lot of the other ones, discounting the positives. So it's when your brain's going, oh, that was a good thing. Yeah, good things don't count. And an example of that could be if, you're meeting someone new and they seem really nice. It's like, you're thinking, oh, maybe they're just doing that to be polite. Maybe they don't really mean it. Or if, you're having a good afternoon with your kids and you're like, okay, yeah, but, you're just waiting for the next bad thing to happen. So this, I think, happens so much, and could go hand in hand with the mental filtering, or if we have that negativity bias where we're filtering out those good moments or good comments. What I like to do, if we do notice that, is to really take a moment to step back and soak in those positive moments. Like I mentioned in that negativity bias segment, practicing gratitude is really such a natural antidepressant and can really help with giving balance to the negative filtering that we may do, or discounting the positives. So that's another sneaky thinking trap or cognitive distortion that could get in our minds. Number 6, mind reading. So this is all about assuming, as if you are this all-knowing, not to say, put anyone down, but sometimes people really think they're mind readers and are assuming that they know what other people are thinking. So this is another very common thinking trap I see all of the time. So let's say someone, like you message someone and they're not responding to you right away. And then your brain goes off with all these different stories and scenarios that, are they annoyed with me? Are they mad at me? Did I do something wrong? Those are assumptions. And there's way more that I could go into as far as why you may be thinking that way. I think part of it is with these thinking traps, and a lot of them being anxiety driven, is we want to have some sense of control. And I think one way we do that is by looking at ourselves and looking at what we may have done or not have done, because then there's something we could maybe do about it, or there's some level of control there, even though in reality, there's a lot that is not in our control. Like, let's say they didn't respond back, and it could be that they were busy or something else got their attention, and it has nothing to do with what you have done or didn't do or whatever you said maybe. So I know I've seen that all the time, that we could get worried about that when it's not really about us. I think everyone's really just worrying about themselves more versus the other way around. Number 7 for cognitive distortions or thinking traps is emotional reasoning, which means we take our emotions as fact when our feelings are not necessarily reality or fact. So an example of that could be is if you feel like you're a failure, you feel like you're incompetent, and then you then tie that to, or like have that mean that that's who you are as a person, which is not true. Like if you feel incompetent, then you think I am incompetent, or I am a failure, or I am, fill in the blank. When our feelings are not necessarily dictating who we are and our identity and who we are as a person. So I say this all the time to patients I see, because if, let's say, they do have depression or anxiety or whatever other diagnosis they have, I always say that that is a condition, or it's a label, but that's not who you are. What you have does not define you and does not make you who you really are at your core. So I think that's a huge thing with emotional reasoning to keep in mind. Like you can say, oh, I am noticing feeling so angry right now or so upset right now. But does that mean you're an angry person? I think that's the important distinction there, or separation we would need to have, because feelings come and go like clouds in the sky, clouds floating by. The one constant is that things change, including feelings. Change is imminent and inevitable. So it's the same thing for our feelings. They come and go too, but they don't have to define us if we don't want to. Number 8 on the cognitive distortion list are should statements. So there's a rigidity to this kind of thinking trap where we have these rigid expectations of how things are supposed to be. So it's like, I should always stay calm no matter what, or with my kids, or I should always be knowing everything when it comes to my job. And it's like, oh my goodness, those are big, hefty statements or expectations that we could end up putting on ourselves and undue extra pressure that could then drive us feeling really worried or really stressed or super anxious. So Tony Robbins, who I think is like a self-help big guru in that world, says, if you make should statements like this, like I should be this, I should be doing that, it's like you're shitting all over yourself. He says it like that, which is hilarious. So, you don't want to shit all over yourself like that. And when you say something like that to yourself and you're saying, I should blank, catch yourself when you're saying that, because, what is that leading you to think and feel then? Is it pressure, anxiety, whatever else? So number 9 on the cognitive distortion list is labeling. So this is kind of what I've talked about before, where we're labeling things as part of who we are. So this is just a separate one to kind of like differentiate it, where we turn our mistakes into identity, let's say. So I made a mistake, for example, and then you think, oh, I'm stupid, I'm dumb, I'm this or that. When you make it into identity statements, when it's like, holy moly, hold on, wait a minute. We don't want to make singular events and have them blown up to be core elements of who we are, because that's a big jump to make mentally. And if you notice it, that's what it is, then, it kind of then gives you that space to take a step back and see, that really doesn't make sense to say that because I just made one mistake, that doesn't mean I'm not a smart person. So that's labeling. And the 10th cognitive distortion I wanted to mention is called personalization. So with this thinking trap, people tend to blame themselves for things that are outside our control, like I mentioned earlier. And when you think about it, with what we really do have in our control and what we don't, it then, seems to doesn't make sense when you really look at it, when if and when you do blame yourself for things that are not in your control. So another example is, I know I'm using a lot of kid examples, but it's like, oh, my child is struggling with something. Oh, I must have failed them somehow. And it's like, whoa, hold on. Just because, and that could be for any loved one, like if it's a family member or a friend that's struggling, or if something happened to them, you're then putting some undue blame on yourself somehow, that as if it's your fault or something that you did, when it's not even something that's in your control. So this is something I would love, if you notice that you're doing it, to catch yourself, because we don't want to be blaming ourselves for things that aren't our fault and that have nothing to do with us or that are not in our control. But this is something that I see happen, that I see it happen a lot of the time with patients I see. And it's even one of the symptoms of depression that we screen for, excessive guilt, where you feel guilty easily for things, even though it's not your fault. And again, this goes back to what cognitive distortions do. They are distorted or altered ways of thinking that skew our perception of reality. I say this all the time when, unfortunately, now depression and anxiety has become a lot more common. And I describe it as like this veil that could be kind of put over our eyes. And then through that, like our world gets filtered through it. And the negative could maybe stick and get stuck and sticky in us, and then the positives not as much. Depression and anxiety, if we're really dealing with that, it can really um, lead us to not perceiving reality or things as they are, and we could be missing out. So now that we went over that big list of the 10 major different cognitive distortions, what can we do about them? So I kind of mentioned it before with being able to challenge them. That's so important. So I hope with going through that list, it's given you some aha moments, like, oh my gosh, I think I do some of that discounting of the positives. Like I just write it off, and I don't even really register it in my brain like I should, or give enough time to really soak it in, or the mental filtering of where just the negative sticks. So if any of those have given you aha moments, I hope, the first step always is awareness and learning. I think that's why learning and knowing about these are so important, because they're such common thinking traps. So first is being able to identify, like, oh my goodness, I do that. Now what? So, in your day-to-day, try your best to be able to catch when you are engaging in any of those thinking traps, whether it's like the should statements, whether it's, you notice, oh my goodness, I was totally like reading that other person's mind and assuming, and then you want to challenge it. Like, is it really, the case? Like, oh, they didn't respond back to me, is it me, or maybe they just have something going on and that's really what it is. So I think challenging when you do identify, like, oh my goodness, I'm totally like doing that thinking trap, is what's so important, and with actual evidence. So let's say it's a friend, that hasn't responded back, and you know them, and you think, okay, they mean well, I know they love me and they care about me, and the bigger likelihood is that they're probably occupied versus them being mad at me or upset at me. Going back to that example of, if your boss wants to go and talk with you, and then you're worried about worst case scenario, you're catastrophizing, like you think that your job is at stake or something, you want to think at like, okay, what's the actual evidence behind that? Is there any actual legitimate basis for me being fired or my job being in trouble? And then you can actually probably find that you do good work and you have evidence for that, that you could actually look back at and see like, oh, I have a really good streak. So, okay, does that really make sense? So no, we want to challenge these thinking traps because they could be very sneaky and they could kind of be in the driver's seat and taking over the way we think and then feel and then act and behave, which we don't want those kind of sneaky negative thinking traps in the driver's seat. We want our higher self, grounded, calm, and ever present version in that driver's seat and running things. I think another interesting about this is that the brain is a problem solving machine. It wants to be able to solve and figure things out. But I think with these thinking traps, what ends up happening is it kind of creates problems that don't even really exist, with the assuming and focusing on the negative too much and making these stories up. I think of this line that this psychiatrist, Dr. Daniel Amen says, is that don't believe every thought you have, because your brain's a thinking machine, and with a thought that may come up that is along the lines of these thinking traps, it doesn't mean you have to run with it. It doesn't mean you have to believe them. We don't have to believe all of our thoughts like that. But the thoughts that come after that, we can decide. And that's the beauty in that. As far as trying to unlearn these cognitive distortions or thinking traps, aside from challenging them and looking for evidence to the contrary, which is super important, and being aware of them and trying to catch them in your day-to-day life, I think there's also a great opportunity here to develop positive self-talk. And all of these are really good different skills that you can build over time. They're so with time. It could be harder at first and then it gets better over time, to then do the opposite of the discounting the positives cognitive distortion and soaking in the good and soaking in the positives and reminding yourself of the good that's in your core, that you are enough, that you are worthy, that you are smart, that you are kind, and reminding yourself of all the good qualities that you have deep down, and that is part of your identity. So reminding yourself of who you truly are. I think there's always good opportunities there to do it after you notice that you've fallen into one of those thinking traps and you challenge them. I also think there's something so freeing with this realization in psychology that your thoughts are powerful. Yes, they really are, right? Because look at how these kind of thinking traps could then have so much power in a way to then bring you down. And what's freeing is that they're not always accurate, and we can have the power of choosing how we want to think and what we want to believe. And learning to notice these cognitive distortions or thinking traps doesn't mean you're not going to ever have them ever again. And wouldn't that be nice? But it's not, I may have mentioned this some time ago. Neurons are brain cells that fire together, wire together. So, if you've noticed, you do fall into these thinking traps, more or a lot. Don't be hard on yourself. We're all human and this can happen. And, depending on how long you've been thinking that way, your brain could be wired to go to those thinking traps quite easily and automatically. And I want you to remember that the brain is what we call, there's this beauty to the brain called neuroplasticity. The brain has capacity to change no matter how old you are. It is not something for like kids or adolescents or young adults where their brain is still growing and developing and then it's done. Like the brain can continue to change throughout our lifetime. And that is so beautiful. So if you don't want to be falling into those thinking traps anymore, you totally can change that if you would, if that is what you want. And it is work, I'm not going to lie. And if you don't want to be thinking negatively or in those maladaptive or not serving you kind of ways, it is possible. I think what's can make it fun is to make it like a game. So it's like a catch the distortion game or catch that thinking trap game. So for you to grow your awareness for, if you are actually engaging in those kind of thinking patterns, is to notice certain words you're using. So like I said, with the should statements, that's one of the words you want to catch and see if you're making should statements. Other kinds of words you want to catch are if you're using words like always or never, which are absolutes and can be very common if you're in that black or white thinking mode or all or nothing mode. Like things are always like this or things are never like this. You want to catch if you're using those words too, because then you want to step back after you notice that and say, is it really always that bad? Or do things never really go your way? Really, do they never, ever? So, a lot of the time when you're making those statements, you can then really see that there isn't truth to it, that it really isn't black or white or all or nothing. So I think it could be a fun game that you can kind of play every day with trying to catch those different words. Or other words could be like, oh, everyone. You don't want to overgeneralize and have one event be then about a collective or about nobody. I think this can then help with shifting our mind from things being permanent and rigid all the time, which could then lead to feeling more stressed and anxious and then super sad or guilty easily, that was just a blip. Oh, that was like a one-time thing. That was a temporary event, which is more likely the reality of it. So I want to close with saying that if you did notice after going over those 10 major cognitive distortions or thinking traps that you do one of them or all of them or some of them a lot of the time, don't be hard on yourselves. It can happen, and I hope, like I said, that this overview has given you some aha moments and you take it away in your day-to-day to be more aware and challenge those thinking traps, because they are sneaky, pesky little things, and they could be then leading to these heavy emotions or anxiety, stress, worries, even feeling depressed, things that we don't want to be stuck in or feeling. That's all I have for now. And thank you for watching and listening. And I love you all. And I hope this helps with you becoming a healthier and happier you. And have a good one. I'll see you next time. By the way, all of my loves, I just want to put out there that this is content I've created for educational purposes only, and it is not medical advice. If you feel like, especially after listening to this or in general, you're needing medical or mental health treatment, please go seek a professional to get that kind of care. And as always, if you feel like you or someone is in a medical or mental health emergency, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room, whatever's faster, to get the care that you need.